Our next guest is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He writes the daily blog, The Economy Hub, for the Los Angeles Times. He is, in my opinion, one of the best writers we've got on the economy, on business, and on the political dimensions of the above. Michael Hiltzik joins us once again. Mike, thanks for coming back on the program.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for your kind words.
Oh, absolutely. And I wanted to talk to you. Everybody's following the healthcare debate. Many readers and listeners, it gets complex and convoluted. But you had some pretty blunt words the other day about Mick Mulvaney, who is President Trump's budget director, and a few for John Dickerson, who is interviewing him on Face the Nation. You said that Mulvaney engaged in a drive-by shooting of some of the nation's neediest and most defenseless people, the disabled, and that if that was arrogant, ignorant, and abetted by the news media, meaning previous Republican attacks and that kind, in this case, moderator John Dickerson, who let the words pass without comment, both should be ashamed of themselves. I've mangled the quote slightly, but I think the intent comes along. What are we talking about here? What did Mulvaney say?
Well, sure. Mulvaney, this was about a 7-minute appearance on Face the Nation, the CBS Sunday talk show. And Mulvaney was being asked by Dickerson about the Affordable Care Act and Medicare and Medicaid. And as a parting shot, really in the last 30 or 40 seconds, he was asked about basically President Trump's commitment to not tamper with the entitlements, that is Social Security and Medicare. And Mulvaney replied, well, let me ask you a question. Do you really think that Social Security disability insurance is part of what people think of when they think of Social Security? And then he went on to say disability is the fastest growing program in Social Security, that it grew tremendously under Obama, and it's very wasteful. And that was that. Dickerson, as I pointed out, his response to this was in its entirety, okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you for coming on. Now, as I pointed out, Mulvaney managed to pack 3 or 4 mistruths or lies, really, about disability into these few words, and they were typical of the Republican approach to disability going back years and years. And Dickerson's response was also typical of the way that the press has treated these sorts of attacks on disability. There's no knowledge in the press about what disability really entails, what the program is and how it works, and they let these attacks just go unchallenged.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I really appreciate you bringing this exchange to light, because I had missed it, first of all. And I think, and you make this point in your piece as well, but I think it really, as you just said, it packs in not only a lot of misinformation, but to me, a certain kind of Republican strategy. A lot of people tend to talk about the exceptionalism of Donald Trump, but in this case, this is someone in Trump's administration being anything but exceptional from a Republican point of view, being a very typical Republican. I think the other dimension of it, and we'll get into the lies that you document in your piece, but the other dimension of it, I think, is that there was an element in these comments of separating the other, from the mainstream of the pack. In other words, that the disabled, well, I know I'll probably need Social Security retirement benefits someday because I figure I'll get old, my parents are old, but maybe I don't know anybody who's on disability right now. Maybe I've heard that people on disability are freeloaders. They're the other people. They're a different kind of person than me. It seems like it's also a way of trying to divide us so that we don't think of Social Security or government or even our society as something where we're all in this together. Does that make any kind of sense to you?
I think you're absolutely right. Over the years, and I've documented a lot of these attacks, this is part of essentially a conservative or Republican technique of identifying the undeserving poor. And I put undeserving poor in quotes because that's the way enemies of these programs want to portray their beneficiaries. And I think the disabled are particularly vulnerable to this because I think their enemies have been very successful of painting them as malingerers and idlers and crooks, essentially, who are just sitting around collecting the check, even though they're perfectly capable of going out and work. And I think that works against the real truth of Social Security disability, which is that it's, in fact, pretty hard to get. You have to really document in great detail your disability. You have to, first of all, you have to wait for at least 6 months before you can even apply after you're disabled. You have to document your disability, whether it's physical or mental. You get checked every few years, or at least you're supposed to be, to make sure you're still disabled. And you have to show that you are so disabled that there's very little prospect of improvement and that you are not able to maintain basically a working life. And the standard for that is that you're not able even to work at a job that will pay you something in the neighborhood of $15,000 or $16,000 a year. So the bar to reach that is pretty high. And in fact, only 40% of applicants for Social Security disability are successful at getting benefits, and that's after several rounds of appeals if you want to go through it. So it's not easy to get. It's not idlers. It's not malingerers. It's people who are genuinely disabled, who genuinely cannot work at a living wage job. And these attacks on them, I think, are really despicable because they come out of ignorance and arrogance.
And they foster ignorance. I mean, they're designed to spread ignorance, right? And by the way, and I know you know about this because you've written about it. And again, we're talking with Los Angeles Times columnist Michael Hiltzik, and I've written about it too in the past. Is they've cut the administrative budget, making it harder so that people who are disabled and unable to work and desperately need the money, and sometimes they have to wait. How long is it now? A year to get a hearing? Longer?
Well, yes, it's sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's even a year and a half. And there isn't a year that passes that the Social Security Administration doesn't go to Congress and say, look, if you want us to reduce the backlog on these cases, you have to give us the money to do so. And Congress, instead of responding positively to that, tends to cut the budget even more.
And yeah, I mean, it's despite the fact that Social Security is required by law not to draw down from general funds or contribute to general deficits. So even though it's the money of the people contributing in that's being used to administer, Congress has control and they pull it back. My conspiracy theory that I don't think is so crazy is that they're going to make it so difficult by stripping them of to apply and work with the Social Security Administration by robbing it of needed funds, that they'll then say, well, see, the government can't do that. Let's give it over to the private sector.
Well, that's I wouldn't disagree with your conclusion that that's a viable conspiracy.
Yeah, a viable conspiracy is a good way to put it. So now let's talk about Mulvaney's, the misconceptions that, let's be kind, that Mr. Mulvaney perhaps inadvertently spread. I'm being too kind now, but Social Security...
You're being very charitable to somebody who is actually the head of the Office of Management and Budget and should know the truth before he opens his mouth.
Right. What I'm actually doing is lying, because he knows. Okay, he said that Social Security disability was the fastest growing segment of the Social Security system. True or false?
False. In fact, Social Security disability rolls are shrinking. They peaked about 2014, and this was an artifact of the recession. They peaked. They've been falling since then. They're going to fall a little bit more, and then they're going to grow again. At least that's the projection from the Social Security trustees. But they're going to grow at a very, very slow rate, pretty much less than 1% a year, maybe closer to 0.5%. By contrast, Social Security retirement enrollment has been growing, constantly growing. It grows every year, and it's going to continue to grow at a much faster pace in coming years, and it shows no sign of slacking off. So essentially, the Social Security trustees, as I said, disability has peaked. The rolls have been shrinking. When the growth resumes, it's going to grow at about a little over 0.5% a year through 2036. Retirement's going to grow by about 66% in that time frame.
So, Mulvaney made 3 rapid-fire statements at the close of this interview. Statement number 1, it's the fastest-growing program. False. Statement number 2, it grew tremendously under President Obama. Is that true or false?
Well, I think we can call that true, but extremely misleading. It grew under Obama because disability rolls are sensitive to unemployment. And the reason for that is that when jobs disappear, the jobs that disappear first are the jobs that disabled people are most able to do. That is office jobs, things like that. And what's left are menial jobs, physical labor, which by their nature are jobs that disabled people have a very hard time finding and keeping and working at. So you find sort of a parallel between the unemployment rate and the disability rate. But because we have seen the unemployment rate drop, that's one of the factors that has led to this plateauing and indeed the diminution of the disability rolls. So if what Mulvaney was doing was blaming Obama administration policies for the growth in those years, that's a lie.
So, okay, so we've got a lie, something that was either misleading or a lie. Third, factual, a declaration of fact, I should say, I won't say factual statement from Mr. Mulvaney. It's a very wasteful program. True or false? False, okay, all right.
I'll anticipate your question. That's also false. This is a common right-wing talking point against the program, but there's no evidence for it. What we get, we tend to get a lot of anecdotes about some clutch of workers here or there who found a way to game the system temporarily. Typically, we know about them because they're found out by the authorities and they are brought to justice. The statistics say that the error rate in Social Security disability is something in the neighborhood of 1% of benefits, and that counts both overpayments, which is the sort of waste that I think Mulvaney would be talking about, and underpayments, that is, payments to beneficiaries that aren't as much as they actually deserve under the law.
And it wouldn't count, for example, at all, people who die during the year and a half that they're waiting for benefits and never get them at all. They wouldn't even show up as an underpayment, I would assume. So I think there was someone, another Republican, I think it was Grassley or somebody, had a report run on overpayments, but didn't run a report on underpayments. So they made it sound like this program was just hemorrhaging money, but in fact, it's not at all inefficient. And if you measure efficiency as the cost of administration versus the cost of benefits, I think it would be pretty clear that it is far more efficient than any private sector program in the insurance. And I used to work in the corporate insurance field. I think at this point administrative costs are in the 1% range, and I don't think there's any insurer in the country in the private sector who can make a claim of that kind. And and I guess where I'd like to go with this, Michael Hiltzik, perhaps in conclusion, is to return back to where we started, which is it all seems to be aimed at demonizing the people who receive these benefits. I was in an automobile accident and I got, medical coverage for that. But I don't hear, people sometimes fraudulently submit auto accident claims. I don't hear anybody demonizing everybody that ever got their fender replaced because somebody went to a phony body shop somewhere. And yes, you have overpayments, you have underpayments, you have occasional cases of fraud, you have occasional cases of incompetent administration or whatever. But if the error rates are very low, the efficiency rate is very high, it seems to me that goes back to that this is an ideological assault on the concept of social insurance as a part of our society.
I think that's absolutely true. And we haven't even talked about what I think was the fundamental misconception that Mulvaney was promoting here with his very first words when he said, do you really think Social Security disability is what people think of when they think of Social Security? And my response to that is that if Mulvaney really doesn't think that disability insurance is or should be part of Social Security, then he needs to take that up with Dwight Eisenhower.
Right.
because it was Eisenhower, a Republican president, who signed the bill that put disability into the Social Security system. And as I pointed out, that wasn't even a novel idea in 1956 when he did it. The drafters of Social Security and the people who ran the program had been working on how to add disability coverage to the Social Security system going all the way back to 1936, just after the Social Security Act had been passed. This was something they were grappling with. It's a very complicated notion, but the fact is that since 1956, when disability became part of Social Security, and as you said, it's a social insurance program. It really helps people long before they reach retirement age. The entire Social Security program, retirement and disability, is now wrapped up into one thing, and disentangling it would be a job so complicated that these magicians who at this point are trying to grapple with repealing the Affordable Care Act, they would have no chance of being able to do this in any way that didn't hurt millions of people.
Well, and I think what your remarks also point to is a sort of extreme reversion to many years back, perhaps almost a century back, in our political system that these guys represent. I'm sorry we have to come to an end. We didn't even get to talk about John Dickerson, and you're a journalist, and a lot of questions there about why these remarks get to go on unchallenged. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So, Michael Hiltzik, we could do another 15 minutes on that. But Michael Hiltzik, columnist for the Los Angeles Times, thanks for the great work, and thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure.